So when we want to evaluate indices, basically what we're looking at here is a list of rules, of operations, of instructions for us to do. And the best thing we can do is learn to decode those, and then we can adapt it to solving index equations, which will ultimately be the point of this video. So we've got different things going on here. So if I've got a base term, I could have a negative and then the top and bottom of a fraction, and each part of those mean a different thing. The negative here means to reciprocate, or the reciprocal is to flip over, upside down, do 1 over. It ends up inverting a fraction. The top number is a power, so a 2 would be a squared, a 3 would be a cube, and the bottom number is a root. So over 2 is a square root, over 3 is a cube root. So what we've got going on in this expression, if I'm asked to evaluate, that means to give a value for. If I'm asked to evaluate this expression here, I've got the 4th root. I'm cubing, and I am reciprocating. So I'm flipping upside down. And so the things to think about are, which order do you want to do them in? What's going to make things simplest? And obviously identifying which operations are working. Are you rooting? Are you cubing? What's going on? So just to reiterate, the 2 there, that's a square. The opposite of that would be something over 2, and that would be a square root. And this is important for what we're coming on to next. A cubed would be a cube, obviously, and then a to the 3rd is a cube root. A to the minus 1 means to take a and reciprocate it, so 1 over a to the minus 1 takes you back. These two work in a circle with each other. And you could imagine that a to the 4 would be the 4th power, and so a to the 1 over 4 would be the 4th root. So how does all of this help us when we're solving index equations? Well, in this case, I'm not being asked to evaluate, I'm being asked to solve. What is the value of x such that when we do x to the power of minus 3 over 2, we end up with 8? Well, the first thing we should do is to have a look at what operations we're being asked to do. So that minus there, that is to reciprocate, that's to flip upside down. Rocate. The 3 is on top of the fraction, so that's a cube. And the 2 on the bottom of the fraction, that's technically a half, so that's a square root. So those 3 operations, flipped upside down, cubed, and square rooted, were done to x, and that gave us an answer of 8. So to get back to x, I'm going to need to undo all of these operations. So I'm going to reciprocate, because reciprocating kind of undoes itself. But instead of cubing, I'm going to cube root both sides. And instead of square rooting, I'm going to square, and that will undo each of those operations. Now again, it doesn't matter which order you do things in, but one will probably make it easier than the other. So I would always go for the one that simplifies before it then makes it more complicated again. But I'll run through both. So let's get rid of the cube around this one. So I want to get rid of the cube, so I'm going to cube root both sides. Okay, so if I cube root this side, this 3 here, that's going to disappear. So I'm going to end up with x to the minus 1 over 2 equals the cube root of 8. So it undoes that process. That gives me x to the minus a half equals 2. That is a 2. There we go. And then instead of square rooting, which is what I've got here, I'm going to square, because I want the opposite the inverse function, if you will. So I've got x to the minus 1 now, and then I end up with 2 squared on this side. So x to the minus 1 is 4. And then to undo a reciprocal, I'm going to reciprocate again. So x is 1/4. Now hopefully if I do this in the opposite direction, so I square, then cube root, then reciprocate, I'm going to end up back at the same thing. So let's square first, shall we, on this side? Let's square. So that will leave me with x to the minus 3. The 2 on the bottom of the fraction told me that I was square rooting x as part of this problem. I need to undo that square root, so I'm going to square. So that will give me x squared, which is 8 squared is 64. We could reciprocate now if you want. Okay, reciprocate. That would give us x cubed equals 1/64. Notice that the power always changes here, so it's as I'm removing things from here, I'm not going to continue writing them, I'll get rid of them. And then last but not least, I'm going to cube root here. So this is the cube root of 1/64, which is 1/4. So let's do one more just to make sure this is all okay, and I've picked a fraction this time just to be a bit meaner. So the powers that we've got, or rather the operations that we're doing to x here, are we're going to reciprocate it, we cube it, whatever it is, and then we square root, or in any order, and that gave us 27/64. So to undo all of those processes then, reciprocate, I'm still going to reciprocate, cube, I'm going to cube root, and square root, I'm going to square. That's what I'm going to do. As I said before, it doesn't matter which order we do those in, so let's pick the one that makes it simplest at any one point. So we're always going to try and go for the simplest thing. Right, to me it makes no sense to square it because I do not want to do 27 squared, even with a calculator. Let's cube root it, because that will definitely make things simpler. So I'm trying to get rid of this cube here, and I'm going to cube root. So that leaves me with x to the minus 1/2, gotten rid of that 3, and that is the cube root of 27/64. Oh, that's the square root at the moment. Let's put a little 3 there, that's the cube root. Right, so x to the minus 1/2 is now equal to 3/4. Doesn't matter which one of the next two I get rid of, so let's get rid of the reciprocal, the negative here, by reciprocating this fraction, by flipping it upside down. So x now to the half, because I'm getting rid of the minus, is 4/3. And then last but not least, I want to get rid of this half here, which means to square root, so I'm going to square, and that will give me x equals 16/9.